In today's video, I'm going to share with you 9 different guitar amplifiers that surprised me to no end. These are amplifiers that either sounded far better than they should, or they weren't on my radar, and they totally shocked me with their tones and versatility. Let's get into it. The first amplifier on this list has to be the PRS Sonzera. This is a 20 watt combo. They also make a larger one at 50 watts, but the one that surprised me the most was the 20 watt amp. And the reason why, it comes stock with a Celestion V-type speaker, and it also comes equipped with 6L6 output tubes, giving it a much fuller and rounder sound over many other amps at this size, which are usually inherently either 6V6, think Fender Princeton kind of thing, or they're either EL84s, very reminiscent of that of a Vox. So having 6L6 tubes, which are the 6L6 GCMS power tubes, gives it a big, full and round sound, very reminiscent of a Fender amplifier. Now, I think where this amplifier shines the most is on the clean channel. So if you're looking for a great portable 20 watt amp that has a great clean channel and a great speaker already in there, the Sonzera 20 makes a whole lot of sense. This is one of those amplifiers you have to hear to sort of know that it does feel very different to play over that of, say, a 65 Deluxe Reverb or any other number of Fender amps. It has its own sound, which is also really great. Now, the only small disadvantage to this amplifier is the drive channel isn't spectacular. We got a chance to try these both clean and dirty, and the clean channel sounds beautiful with pedals. The drive channel, you can get away with it in a pinch, but I didn't find it to be anything spectacular. PRS amplifiers always seems to have a little bit of this sort of fuzz type overdrive tone that will appeal to some people, but it isn't really my kind of thing. But if you like it, go ahead and use it. But I really feel the strength of this amplifier is its unique tone mixed with its power tubes, and also the fact that it handles pedals as well as it does. Overall, if you're looking for something very, very different that's still very portable, give this amp a look. The second amplifier on this list has to be the Fender Pro Jr. Now, I've kind of dismissed these amps for a long time in terms of live use, but they're plenty loud. They're way louder than I thought they would be. I've owned Blues Juniors. I've got an Artist Tweak Tone 20, which is 20 watts. The Blues Juniors are 15. These are also 15 watts, but the Pro Jr has a much smaller speaker, and it's an amp that I've never really felt like I was that interested in, based on the fact it had no reverb and it was just brain dead simple. So it was interesting to give these a shot and just be completely overwhelmed by how great they sound in the mix. They have a whole lot of poke at the expense of just sounding that little bit boxy when you compare them to larger amps and larger cabs. So if you don't know, not only does the speaker size impact the sound greatly, but also the cabinet size. That makes a huge difference to the overall output of the amplifier in terms of its bloom in the room and spread of sound. So if you're looking for something that will get you by to jam with friends, it's really light and pretty loud considering its size, the Fender Pro Juniors are great. Now, we had a chance to test out the tweed one as well as the standard black edition, and both were great. But if you're looking for a little bit of extra poke, go for the tweed one. I'll leave links in the description below. Up next is an amplifier that completely caught me by surprise. It also caught Dr. Rick by surprise when I had a chance to plug this in. This is the MG30FX from Marshall. Now, this is a solid state amp with digital modeling effects built in. You get delays and reverbs and all that kind of stuff thanks to a dial on the front. But one of the cool things about it is it has a great clean channel that handles pedals beautifully. I would highly recommend checking out this amp with your favorite pedal board if you're looking for something that's light and fairly loud considering what it is. A solid state amplifier generally won't have the same amount of output because I usually skimp on things like the speaker. Depending on the speaker efficiency mixed with how many watts it is and its overall design will contribute greatly to the overall output volume of the amp. Now, these are completely closed back, so they are fairly directional, but one of the things that shocked me the most about this was just how great it sounded with the clean channel cranked up most of the way in the room and then just running my pedal board into the front. I could use this at small gigs. It sounds far better than it should. It's far cheaper than you might assume as well. And being that it's a sort of under the radar amp, get them while there's still a bargain, because if we all know what happened with the PV Bandit, they kind of went up in price on the used market. They're a great amplifier, but this little Marshall amp is definitely a catch. I would go check these out. I wouldn't rely on the built-in effects too heavily. I don't think they sound very good. It also does have its own drive channel as well, which is usable, but I really feel like these shine on the cleans, crank them up, and that 10-inch speaker will be pumping to its maximum. I gotta tell you, the MG30FX is one of the best unknown small amps out there if you're looking for a pedal platform. I really love these things. Go check them out. Up next is a Vox amplifier that I've been a huge fan of for a number of years. I've nearly purchased one of these and I've held off because I've owned both a Vox AC15 and an AC30, and after a while I tend to get a little bit over the Vox sound for my particular type of music, and then I went ahead and plugged into the Vox AC10C1. Man, this amp has some of the best vibe out there, and if you pair it with a tube screamer, you get all the mids back that Vox amps inherently lose, and I love the simplicity of this amp. It's very cool. It's basically one channel. You get the top boost channel of that found in something like the Vox AC15C1, for example, and you get a basic reverb and you're good to go. So I love the simplicity of this amp. Having a gain control built into the front end of the amp is something that I really love. It sounds great with or without pedals, but if you want to get into the lead tone territory, hook up a tube screamer or any prominent mid boost pedal and you're going to get a really great fat sound. These have some of the best sustain I've ever heard. Check this out. Up next on the amps that surprised me the most, I've got to put this in here. This is the Fender ToneMaster Deluxe Reverb. Now, I've owned the Fender ToneMaster Twin, and it's a really, really great amp. I wasn't that overly interested in trying the Deluxe Reverb, being that I've owned a 65 Deluxe Reverb and also a 68 reissues, of course. I'm not that wealthy. But anyway, the ToneMaster Deluxe Reverb sounded awesome in the mix. I was right at home as soon as I plugged into it, which was something that can't be said for a lot of other amps out there. Orange. Excuse me. I'm a huge fan of this amp, whether or not you're going to rehearsals or you're doing some small gigs. Anywhere where a Deluxe Reverb is loud enough, the ToneMaster Deluxe Reverb will be loud enough. Now, some might say if you compare a ToneMaster to a tube amp, you're going to hear a difference, and that's pretty much true. But if you've only got one, you won't know the difference. I really feel like the way the Deluxe Reverb ToneMaster feels to play really surprised me. I was shocked how much I enjoyed it. For those who are unfamiliar with the ToneMaster amplifiers, they're by far the best digital modeling amps out there. They do one thing and they do it extremely well. The only small trade-off is if you're into using clean boosts, sometimes they don't always sound great going into the Twin, for example, but in the Deluxe Reverb, pushing in the front end actually works to some extent. So if you're interested in these amps, I'll also leave links below. Now, if you know the channel, you'll probably know I'm a massive fan of the Marshall DSL-40CR. I still stand by the fact it's the best amp I've ever owned. The reason why? It works with or without pedals beautifully. So I kind of dismissed the DSL-20CR, which is the smaller counterpart or the smaller brother, whatever you want to say. They kind of half-assed it a little bit by putting in a Celestion 7080, which can sometimes work great in amps, and other times it's like, did you even try? And the fact is that it's 20 watts, then you can switch it down to 10 watts. I didn't think it would be good enough for my kind of use if I was going out and playing live, but this amp totally rocks. The Marshall DSL-20CR has way more vibe and mojo than I ever gave it credit for. Now, I reviewed this amp and I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as the Marshall DSL-40, which I can switch down to 20 watts. So it made more sense for me to go for more headroom. But after playing this amp with its crappy Celestion 7080 speaker, man, it sounds great. It's a great pedal platform, and I'm seriously considering buying one of these coming up. And when it comes to amplifiers that cut the mix on this list, without question, the Marshall DSL-20CR would be one of the top amps because it just sounded so prominent and voicey in the mix. It gave me plenty of sustain, plenty of volume. It handled my pedals beautifully. The only small trade-off with this is there's no classic Marshall crunch channel. You get the ultra gain channel, which is that higher gain channel, which is very usable if you're playing certain types of music. But if you're looking for a traditional sort of classic rock sound, sometimes the ultra gain channel can be a little bit much. But crank up the clean channel, get it firing, throw a distortion or overdrive into it, and you're going to be loving it. This is definitely one of my favorite amps on this list. Go check it out. Up next is an amplifier I never had a chance to use in the context of a live mix, but I've reviewed it and also used it on other gear reviews last year, which is the Roland Blues Cube. Now, a lot of people will say, which one should I get? The Hot, the Artist, or whatever. Just get the one that suits your vibe the best. I always encourage you to go play them, but if you're going to be looking for something that I personally like, then the Roland Blues Cube Artist is, I think, the perfect compromise, because you still get a lot of output power, but you will also get the ability to switch out the overall output volume thanks to that built-in attenuator. Now, these come with quality speakers. If there's one thing that Roland get right, well, they get a few things right, but one of the things they get right is they don't half-ass their speakers like a lot of other companies. So it's great that they put quality speakers in most of their range of amplifiers. Whether or not you go back to the Roland Jazz Chorus amps or you take a look at their Katanas, for their price, they're loaded with really great speakers, and the Roland Blues Cube is no exception. So this amp is a little bit different. You get a great clean channel, you get a really musical drive channel, which does take out a little bit of your low end, and then you can also get a blend between them both. Now, some people swear by that blended channel. I much prefer either using the clean channel on its own with pedals, or I like using the drive channel with my volume control. I think these amps pretty much play themselves if you're into blues. These are kind of like a modern PV Bandit. A lot of people say, hey, should I buy the Roland Blues Cube or a PV Bandit? The answer is yes. Get the one that you can afford and the one you like the most, because they're both very similar amplifiers. Except if you get a PV Bandit that's used, you'll probably save a fortune. The thing about the Roland Blues Cubes is they are a little bit expensive, so just keep that in mind. But overall, man, the tones of these things are great. And for a solid-state amplifier that never needs its valves replaced or anything like that, definitely give these a look. Roland make their amps really well. They're built like tanks, and you'd expect these to last for a very long time. Up next is an amplifier I finally had a chance to play. I've never done a review of one of these that I can remember, but I had a number of people ask me, what do I think of the Fender Bassbreaker 007 amplifier? So if you're unfamiliar with these are 7-watt tube amps. The Fender Bassbreaker comes with two 12AX7 preamp tubes and two EL84 output tubes. So it's kind of Voxy in its design, but it has a very different sound to the typical character of most Fender amplifiers. Now, the Bassbreaker 30R is arguably my favorite high gain or higher gain amplifier from Fender. I love that, but this little one was a whole lot of fun, and it filled the room in a very different way. So while this was plenty loud to jam with friends, it's probably not quite loud enough to gig with in a big room, but the vibe of the amp spoke for itself. It really sounded great at the expense of sounding a little bit boxy, and that's because this thing is tiny, but you get a very usable drive channel that you can also push with pedals if you so choose to use it that way. This might be one of the only Fender amplifiers out there that doesn't have a dedicated clean channel, which is great. I like when companies do something different. It'd be like Marshall, for example, releasing an amplifier with only a clean channel. It would be weird, but it would also be cool if you're a fan of that particular brand. So I highly suggest going to check out the Bassbreaker 007. I really feel like this is one of the best small amps out there. If you're looking for something with a whole lot of mojo, maybe not the greatest spread of sound out there, but something that you could record with or just jam with friends. This last amplifier on the list may shock the regulars who has already subscribed to the channel and might not shock others, but I've never played one of these amplifiers until recently. I'd never heard one, and I gotta tell you that this amp totally rocks. There's one big exception to it, but it sounds great, and this is the EVH 5150 loaded with the 6L6 output tubes. This thing sounds huge. Now, I'm talking specifically about the 2x12, and it weighs a ton. That's the only downside to it, but you can get anything out of this amplifier, from great clean tones all the way through to musical crunch tones, and then it can go into the higher gain territory. Now, Dr. Rick had a chance to play one of these at one of our Keys to the Guitar Shop series videos, and it sounded far better than I ever thought it would. He wasn't even using pedals half the time through this, because the drive channel sounded as great as it did. Now, that's not surprising. If you're an EVH fan, you'll know this already, but coming from someone who mostly plays blues and rock kind of stuff, this wasn't on my radar, or it wasn't high on my radar, because it just wasn't something that I was into personally. But this shocked me quite a lot, and Rick ended up using it for the entire session because of how great it sounded. Now, if this isn't on wheels, it's impossible to move. It took two of us, which I would consider us being fairly strong at least anyway. It took two of us to get this out from the amp room into the place where we were playing, because it was brutal. Lucky there's side handles. I would only say buy this amp if you're either very strong or you've got a trolley or something to help you move this thing around. It is brutally, brutally heavy. It's by far the heaviest amp I've ever picked up. I couldn't lift it on my own from the top handle. That's how heavy this thing is.